Hello, I'm male feminist Anders Bloom, and because all lives matter here at Thorin's channel, I give you a big welcome.
Right, I'm here for another one of my Patreon discussions. And we've got a new person joining the chat now. It's actually vaguely exciting because the thing is, normally it's just the same 4 or 5 of us. But the good thing is, what I try to do on this type of content, if people have never seen it before, is I make it way more open ended. And in theory, I just try to go where the conversation is. Like, we don't have set topics we have to talk about. And we don't have, we don't have to talk about things that are even currently topical if people don't want. If you want to talk about classic things from the past, we can do that as well. But since you're joining the group, what we like to do is, when you first come to one of these chats, I think it's cool if you pick a topic that you're interested in or something you want to discuss, and then we start there. So what would you have here, Mohammed?
So the thing, what I'm really interested in is like the Thorin's thoughts type of videos, and I find myself going back and watching those a lot because they relate to my work environment or what I'm doing with my work. So the really interesting topics are like
what is that though? Because people won't know what your work topic is.
Oh, so I'm doing a PhD in applied linguistics, and I'm focusing on how people learn a second language. So the general learning theory is interesting to me, especially in games. Like, it's not a one-to-one matchup, but some things can transfer, some things can help explain things that go on in games. So the really interesting topic for me is like this notion of limited end state and that's really pervasive in video games in general. It's I see it in a lot of places, and interestingly enough, like you and most or some of your guests, they don't describe it as a limited end state per se, but they really they hover around the topic, and it shows that they do know what they're talking about.
Sure. Well, actually, that's one of the things that I haven't been able to make it a heavy focus. Like, obviously, it's not my field. But one of the things I noticed from being in esports for so long, because I was literally in it professionally from 2001, is I would literally say most of the first 10 years were an absolute waste of time in terms of building up like terminology around the game concepts, being able to explain like the highest level player to the layman. Like, people tried, but what they did was very, very rudimentary. And probably the worst aspect is, if you know pro players in these games, they're not people like they are. Some of them are geniuses in their mind or how they play in the game, but they aren't at communication. That's actually often a weak spot of most players. They're not very good at articulating themselves, or they don't consciously think on like certain levels. That in the game they might, but that's like, I guess, some sort of an unconscious, or it's sort of a siloed routine that's running when they do that. So one of the things over the last 10 years that I've put a lot more effort into is, first of all, trying to latch on to whenever people manage to actually like concretize a term. So a great example in Counter-Strike, a classic term now that every fan now, because it's such a simple concept when you have the term for it, will think, well, I know that, it's obvious. You wouldn't realize for the first 10 years, this concept didn't exist in that sense. It was sort of described totally differently, and actually a random pleb playing wouldn't even have understood it. And that is the concept of an entry frag, a trade frag in Counter-Strike. And so what happens with that is, once you know that principle, immediately the basics of terrorist side play in the game open up instantly. If you don't understand that, it's the reason why when you used to play Counter-Strike back in the day, it was terrible to play if you didn't have a real team. Because if you played basically a pickup or a mix game, kind of like what matchmaking is now, what you would find is all the terrorist players, because they're all separate players, would go to the sort of outskirts where the terrorists go, and in the areas where the CTs usually hold, nobody would go forwards. And they would all just sit there, hovering around, praying for some mad reason that a CT for no reason pushes. And when that didn't happen, they would either like wait for another person to go in and then just bait that person and follow. But they didn't, because they didn't understand the basic concept of a trade frag. That term didn't exist, and the concept didn't, except for high level players who were almost like initiated into it by playing and looking at what each other are doing, almost like monkeys would learn or something like that. It meant that basic concepts of understanding the game and knowing which the tactical teams are and who's doing genius moves. Like I remember, I used to see, no joke, the players who were really great entries at setting up trade frags like they would do it in a way where if they kill someone, you're going to take over the site. If they die, you instantly get the trade frag. Some of these players, because they were dying so often, no joke, fans were just looking at the scoreboard and seeing that guy at the bottom and saying, they should fucking cut him from this team. And you'd be like, holy shit, what are you talking about? If they remove him, the whole team falls apart. And even worse, they would always say this is the funniest angle. They'd want him cut from the team, and then they'd want some like superstar AWPer added.
So two things. Just first of all, trade frag would be two terrorists coming into a place and 2v1 against the CT, right?
Yeah, in theory, like the first CT kills the first guy, and then the second terrorist kills the CT, and then the idea, because there's the other aspect to it as well, is that's the basic premise, but the reason why it's such a core fundamental concept is, and I don't even know who figured this out first, because again, it's sort of something that you just pick up intuitively initially. Yeah. Basically, the reason why it works is because the CT economy is more, and the CT needs to cover the site. It's always good for the terrorist side to trade. You don't mind losing a man in exchange for one of theirs, because then they only have 4 CTs to cover the map. Then you've taken ground on the map. Then you've moved into a site. Like there's, and also you can always in theory have the numbers advantage as a terrorist if you attack at the right time. So as a result, if you kill one person on the site, well, unless they did some crazy 4-man stack, you've almost certainly got a numbers advantage. So that became basically the building block of getting someone from like casual viewer to vaguely close to what a pro was doing. But until we had that, like I say, it was just sort of a feeling, or like you would almost describe around it. Like you would just say something like, well, don't bait me. And then you try and explain from that why not to bait you. It actually was very, very tricky, because I think that's actually the reason why your field's so interesting, right? Is because people just take all of these things for granted. And I'm nowhere near an expert. I just started to notice some of these things,
I mean, look, before I talk about this point, like I'll just point out, like, even though you say you're not an expert, I like just your for example, the team play conundrum video, like you were talking about concepts that are very entrenched in learning. For example, you're talking about how a team can be greater than the sum of its parts because team play can help them, advance. You even use the term scaffolding, which comes from Lev Vygotsky. So basically, you're saying when a team is in a limited end state, they're unable to perform to a certain degree, or they can't, they're not at a certain level. If they have very good team play, that can, scaffold them up. That can make up for their deficiencies. So that's why I enjoy watching those videos. Is you like, even if you haven't had a formal academic background in those concepts, you've come to realize them, or you've come to conceptualize them based on some evidence you've seen in games, and you've sort of developed that notion. When you talk about fans like demanding a player gets cut, that's an issue of salience to them. Like, because they don't understand what's going on, they don't understand why they're playing like this, and all they see, the most obvious thing, the most salient thing that they can see is his score and him constantly dying, but they don't see what him being an entry frag, or what was the term?
Well, I mean, entry frag would be the initial term. Yeah, trade frag's just what you do with the entry frag in theory.
Yeah, so him dying allows someone else to come in, get a kill, take the site.
Basically, all the values implied in that scenario, right? It's not explicit.
Yeah. So it's an issue of implicit learning, and like your attention is like, because cognitive resources are so limited and attention, so you can only pay attention to so much, right? Even when you have a commentator talking about the value of what just happened, you're not necessarily paying attention to that explicit explanation.
No.
You might just zone it out, and the most obvious thing that you're looking at is what's impressive. It's like you gave an example comparing in League of Legends Forgiven and Reckless, and the fans only noticing when Reckless gets the pentakill.
Yes.
Yeah. So because it says pentakill on the screen, that's really obvious. It's really salient. But what they don't see is that a more trained viewer or a more trained eye seeing that situation, they would see, like, for example, in such a situation, Reckless would be cleaning up. Exactly. Everyone's already busted up, and he's just auto attacking the last 1 or 2 hits on everyone. Whereas someone like Forgiven, there's a game I saw Forgiven playing Graves. I can't remember.
It was Gambit against, I think.
He was in their jungle. I think he was.
Yeah, I think it was actually Gambit against Origin or something. But he was a crazy one where he had to it was around the wolves basically. On
exactly. He
right
was,
side of the map.
Jungle.
Yeah, it's a classic clip.
Holy, I mean, just
his mechanics are just unreal on this clip. If you've never seen it before, I'll link it here if I remember.
Yeah, so if you see someone do he only gets 1 kill from, but the effort he put in to do that is,
he should have been 100% dead. That's the whole premise, right?
Yeah, it's different than someone standing back and letting everyone do all the work for them. So, but then it says pentakill, so that's more obvious to the viewer. So then the assumption then the conclusion they come to, their modus operandi, their hypothesis, is based on just what I saw. Therefore, therefore it's good because this is the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, what you're saying there is actually one of the things that I discovered. It's funny because I first heard about this phenomenon in actually fucking mathematics, where I once read it, like when I was young, I used to like to read biographies of people, and I read a biography of like a few different famous mathematicians and stuff, because basically I was just interested in like the concept of genius or whatever. And the funny thing is, I saw that because of the like concepts like parallel thinking, loads of these guys, when they were young, especially if they were like a prodigy, they would keep thinking like, oh shit, I've just revolutionized the world, oh my god. And then when they would bring the shit that they just figured out on their own in, the professor would be like, yeah, sorry to tell you this bit, but someone actually figured that out like 2,000 years ago. Like, they were like, oh, what the fuck? And basically, like, that's kind of what I've done in a bunch of different fields. Like, I'm nowhere near deep in most of the other fields, like very cursory glances, but a lot of times that I like came up with my own way of describing a principle. Like the scaffolding one you give is a great example, because I often use that as well for communication in teams. I say that in a bad team, you actually need more of that scaffolding, and then later on you want to take it slightly away once people like understand each other implicitly and they don't need to say it. But that's why, for example, North American teams in a lot of games were famous for just screaming everything. And they thought by saying more things, you were giving yourself more chance to win. Whereas the first thing you would actually do as a coach is chop a lot of that away and just keep the parts that scaffold it initially, you know. And actually, to contrast that, I don't know if I gave this example in that video, but there's a very, very famous thing happened in CSGO that blew people's mind in this regard, which is like 4 years ago when the best team was Fnatic. There used to be some ESL events where you could actually get not only the VOD of the game, but you could get the comms of the teams in the game. And so you could listen to like Fnatic, TSM, Virtus Pro, the best teams. And what was mind-blowing was Fnatic had the best team play at the time. They literally used to play as if they were reading each other's minds. Turns out they were reading each other's minds. Like when you listen to the comms, it was fucking a joke. Like some rounds they weren't even saying anything and they were all just rotating off each other perfectly, shooting the guy, like watching each other's backs. And then Pronax would just say some like half a sentence like, now we do BTAC double speed or something, and then they all just go do it perfectly, and you think like, what the fuck is it? I always thought like the American teams, if they saw that, must have just given up instantly. Like, fuck this, like we have no chance.
I mean, to me that sounds like a transition from explicit knowledge to implicit knowledge. They're at a point where implicit basically means or implicit knowledge means something that you can't speak about. And that happens, like, for example, as an English speaker, if I ask you, if I give you two sentences, one is grammatical and one isn't.
You can just feel if it is, right?
Yeah, you can tell. Yeah. Like, I can ask you why. You might like exactly. You might not necessarily.
I probably wouldn't know. I'd have to tell you, but I can always tell when it sounds.
Yeah,
wrong,
yeah, exactly. So that's the transition from explicit to implicit, because they've played so much with each other, they've talked so much in training, probably, that they got to a point where they know what's happening. They know sort of the vibe of the game in their team.
Do any of you guys want to jump in on this? You don't have to, by the way, this is not a fucking PhD disposition or whatever, like, so you don't worry about having to use all the terms you use. Just what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I have a related learning topic, which is more, I wanted to understand your position. So basically when, in the psychology circles, the concept of a learner's mindset, and that we should praise the effort. Instead of saying, oh, you're very smart, you're very good, you should say, oh, good effort, keep doing it. Do you think that that's the right approach when you get to, the top 1%? So the example would be like Golden Glue in League of Legends, where he's known for putting in a lot of hours and so on, but then he doesn't reach the top. So that's someone that you seem to not bet on personally. What's the balance for you?
So basically, this is like error feedback or corrective feedback in a sense, and it's an issue of positive evidence and negative evidence. So basically what that means is when you praise a specific action where it's like a Pavlovian conditioning, you're making it so that action is how do I put this, conditioned in the mind of the learner, so to speak, to like in a sense that how do I put this? So basically, it becomes their go-to action because it's been praised so much. But if you praise the effort in trying to overcome something, that becomes the strengthened condition, is the effort they put into something. In terms of Golden Glue, I think in the Listen Loco 93, was that with High?
Sounds about right.
Yeah. So one thing was referenced was like, Golden Glue is really aggressive in scrims, and like he contests you for every CS, but then it doesn't translate to the game. So one thing that's issues of pressure and all that, aside, one thing that might be happening is an issue of explicit processing. So in the scrim, we hear that teams they don't take it seriously most of the time, or not necessarily take it seriously, that kind of thing. So in a scrim, it's in an environment where he's playing, he's doing like implicit execution of what he knows how to play the game. But then when you get on stage and someone tells you need to do this, that's when explicit processing comes in. And so basically, he's dedicating more cognitive resources to try and execute a certain plan or something that he was told, and that's taking away from his ability to perform at his usual level.
Yeah. I can give a little angle on that as well, which is a very, very common trend. I would say literally the majority of teams, except for the very best ones, this is what really differentiates them, the huge gap. A big problem they have is because so many of them are young men, and because so many of the coaches don't have any of these concepts, they're just also people who know a lot about the game. They will literally in scrims do something ridiculous, like push in an area you would never push. And then when you tell them, like, why did you do that? They're like, look, bro, it's just a scrim. Like, I'm only going to do that in the scrim. And what they essentially do is they condition themselves to play like idiots. And then in the pro game, they have two problems. One, if they do what the coach says, they're now trying to execute things they didn't practice enough in practice. And therefore, they're not as comfortable doing it. Isn't their go-to move. And then two, if they don't, the fallback is the bad habits they just build up and doing stupid shit. And so as a result, these teams always, that's why in interviews, it's the most infuriating thing as an outsider to listen to a pro player in most games do an interview, because it goes like this. Like, like the game just wasn't quite our way when we lost it. We should have won these other two rounds, and we got unlucky on this other one. And then, we had the other round, but then that just went the wrong way at the end. It's like, mate, you're making it sound like everything was in your power. And in theory it was. But if you actually knew your preparation and we could see how often you can execute that in practice, we'd probably find out like you are mega overrating your ability to like successfully execute what you're doing. Like odds are you just take the hits in your mind and you ignore all the misses. And in fact, in practice, you just dismiss the miss because you say, well, that's practice, and it wasn't real. Besides, I'd play seriously on stage. That's a big, big problem a lot of pro players have.
Yeah.
Isn't that something that simple says a lot?
No, that was the joke, yeah. That's why I did that video, because what was funny there was, as soon as Simple did a stream, right, where someone asked him on his stream, like, how do you be consistent? And he said, because first of all, he's speaking in broken English, like he is from fucking Eastern Europe again. And he's obviously never had any formal education in any topic about articulating himself. He just said, it's simple. You just play at your top level all the time. And what's funny is I knew as soon as people hear that, they're just going to dismiss it and go, oh, what a stupid sort of platitude almost to say, like, what would the point of that be? Yeah, of course I'm trying to play at my top level. But what he actually meant, I did a whole video. So the gist of the video is basically, he means it literally in a way that no one would do it. Like they would say, well, I tried to play. No, he means even in practice, play as if it was the map where if you lose, you never get to be a pro again. It's the end of your whole career. It's the same reason why there's a famous similar saying in basketball, actually, where so many of the great players have that cliche where they say, hey man, I played the game like it was my last. Now, when they say that, you just think like, fuck off, because the problem is too many. This is an interesting detail you might like, actually, Mohammed. What happens is other pro players don't examine all the demos and figure out the secrets. They just hear what the guy says in the interviews and start talking like him. So every shit player's saying, well, my goal this season's the championship. I'm a winner. And then you look at their record. You've never even bloody beat out the first one. What are you talking about? And what's happened is it's like they're trying to mimic those aspects, thinking that's what makes you pro. But they're not actually getting beyond the surface. They're trapped on the surface of the comments. So I agree that's a great example, because that's actually one of the areas, by the way, where I was able to nail super early. This is why I have a tweet that nobody can fuck with in this game. I have a tweet from the latter part of 2016 where I say that Simple will be the greatest player to ever play CSGO. Now, everyone now will tell you, but I also said he was really... Nobody in the history of the game ever wrote that sentence, except maybe like a random guy on HLTV, just in the monkeys with a million typewriters type scenario, No analyst ever said it. In fact, they all used to say back then he pushed too much and he shouldn't AWP as much. He was too aggressive and he had bad attitude. But the key reason I knew why is First of all, I had a mad advantage. Not only had I followed the guy's whole career, I've told this now, but people didn't know at the time. You know, when people tell me, like, you don't know anything about what's going on, I literally was getting to listen to the scrims that he would play in Team Liquid in entirety in the comms. I knew everything that was going on. And then when he started streaming, which was largely like when he really popped off, when he came to Team Liquid in North America, I started watching some of his streams because normally I hate streams. Like, if you even watch Get Right when he was the best, if you even watch All Off Meister when he was the best, even Kenny S, like, one of the weird things about Kenny S is, despite the fact at one point he was just always the best player, if you ever watch him in like show matches, he doesn't play seriously, actually. He never really dominates. He never like caps all the people. Like, he can lose to fucking like streamers and fucking commentators and stuff. But here's what's crazy. When I started watching Simple stream, I was like, this can't be real. Like, is he cheating or something? Because in even every matchmaking game he would play on stream, this is not an exaggeration, he would play at the level he played in like the major. He wouldn't just beat these shit players. He would dominate them. Then when he went against the pros, he would dominate them, and he would just never give up. Like, there was never a round he would fuck around and take off. Like, he was just always. That's why people don't realize. No wonder this guy can do stuff with an AWP no one can do. Even Guardian, etc., don't practice like that. You know, they practice on like CSGM or bots mode or whatever, and then they play a few FPL, and their logic there is just to keep my aim sharp, and then they play the scrims. And even in scrims, they don't always play properly. So I actually think, listen, yes, Simple has the most colossal talent ever, but he actually also had probably the best practice ethic. Like, he's basically a one-man Astralis, basically.
You see, basically... So there's like three things that came to my mind with this. The way Simple practices, if we contrast that to other pros and how they practice, what Simple is doing is like, just to put it simply, is effective use of practice. Basically, you've got this hypothesis in your mind of this is basically a limited end state. You've got this hypothesis in your mind about how the game works or how a language works based on all the information you've received. Now, you stay in a limited end state if you don't adhere to selective pressure. So what I mean is, the reason Simple improves a lot is when he takes practice really seriously and he keeps putting himself into situations, like when he says play your best, like play it like a professional match, play it how you would actually play in a professional match. Like you mentioned in one of your videos about a Brazilian team that moved to the US, and when US players or NA players were complaining, oh, we don't get good practice, that Brazilian team still...
Yes. It's basically the core that became MIBR now.
Yeah, and so what they said, oh, we practice like it's a real match. So
exactly.
What Simple is doing is he's constantly putting himself in a position where he's testing his hypothesis of the game. And what he's getting in return for that is correct selective pressure. What he's learning is, if I do this and, you know, I lose, that means it's because he's taking it very seriously and like it's like a real game. The errors he's getting, the times he loses, he's understanding that, okay, this is not right how to play the game in this context, in this situation. If I'm, you know, whatever situation I'm facing, and he keeps doing that, he keeps getting the correct selective pressure. His game keeps adapting to what is correct in each context. Wherever you just fuck off and practice, you let your mind do these mental gymnastics to sort of like deny that you're fucking up or you're getting stopped, and B, you're not getting the right answer. Like LS in his in your video with him, I'm trying to remember, like on TSM's
maybe about
problems.
TSM's problems, exactly.
Yeah, TSM's problems at Worlds. He mentions, like, he says, so Hanser can get away with, you know, fucking up or doing something. So what's happening is, what I mean with correct selective pressure is, if you're fucking off and your opponent can't punish you, the signal you're getting back is, what I did wasn't wrong, it was right, it worked.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So if you keep doing something wrong and you never get corrected, like, I'll give you an example. I can say, like, see, I'm a CSGO novice. Mouse Esports is the best fucking team in the world. They're dominating. And you're an analyst, and you don't correct me. Like, you're a person who's an authority on this, and you don't correct me. I'm gonna walk away with the assumption that yes, what I said was right. You know what I mean? So that's the same thing with language. That's the same thing with practice. If, like, why people persist with broken English, for example, if they speak English as a second language, is when they use it, it's good enough. Therefore, they don't need to exert more effort into improving it. You know what I mean? So, and if it's not getting corrected by the listener, then the signal they're getting back, okay, so I understood the meaning, I conveyed the correct meaning, and I used the correct language to convey it.
Yeah.
So that's
What's interesting about that, by the way, is that's also the reason why one of the wackest excuses that people give in any game goes like this. Well, it's basically like, it's like the argument about saying that you're poor and then someone else is rich. It's like, well, I didn't have the absolute best possible circumstances under all conditions, therefore I could never be as good as you. And it's like, no, it's the other way around, mate. What you actually did was you didn't even make use of what you had. You needed it to be that the absolute best player in the world played you, therefore you'd lose all the time, you'd have a chance to do what you're saying, the selective pressure here. What you couldn't do is you couldn't even play a bad player and do this. Because actually there was a great example like that where, and this is funny because so many people missed this, but I noticed this years ago. It was in 2007 in the game Quake 4, and obviously the Quake series is like a very high-skilled game, but has strategical components, mainly around style, I would say, as opposed to like set tactics, you know? And the key thing was, the best player in this game was also the player with the best aim. It was a player called Toxic from Sweden. He still actually plays Quake Champions now, but he's just not the best anymore. And what was funny was, he was the best for two reasons. One, he had the best aim and consistently, so that'll give you a lot of wins. But even then, in Quake, you can overcome that. There's many good players who do. But secondly, he also had sort of, I would say, the best like default routines in the game, where if he just ran these patterns and did like sort of a simple flow chart based on your actions and then had the best aim, it was basically impossible to beat him because no one could either outthink him sufficiently or like he'd harnessed the correct pattern. And here's what people don't know. He didn't, unlike the others, unlike fucking Cooler in Russia and Fatality in America and the others used to do what all pros do. You try and find the best pros you can and you practice them over and over again. You try and beat them as much as you can, and then the logic goes, right, I must be better now, I'm in shape. What Toxic did was insane. He literally didn't practice with most of the other pros, except one that was like his mate called like Fox, who's another Swede. What he would do was purposely practice against mid-tier random players in fucking public servers and just on his own server, and all he would do is harness those two things. He would just destroy them with aim, and even a mid-tier player, because they're not a complete noob, will still understand basic principles of like where to run on the map, where something happens. And so all he was doing was making those patterns in his brain like fucking steel-clad highways that he could always be on and never have to worry about where he was going. He was just always going around them. And so what's crazy is this guy legit racked up like, Like put it this way, if he, off the top of my head, if he played 15 tournaments, he won 13 of them and was in second at the other two. And what's funny is at the time, this is a great example of how people love to look at the surface and then dismiss any premise of depth, and they don't get anywhere. What people said was, yeah, but Thorin, that only works because he plays Quake, which is a game with not many players, actually. If he played League of Legends, that wouldn't work. Except it would. Like if you actually look at some of the great teams in certain regions that aren't the best, they're crazy outliers who have teams that are way below them as their rivals. So how are they doing it? Because they're doing some method of this. You know, they're basically trying to perfect the game with whatever limited understanding they have, and then just make that execution go to the highest level. Doesn't mean you'll be the absolute best, but it's the way you maximize, I would say, your circumstances.
Yeah. I mean, to me, he sounds like a genius at using, how do I put this? So, like, he sounds like a guy who understood that, you know, whatever your practice context is, you know, you can max it out in the sense that.
I'll give you a quick example. Sure. It's like this famous saying that you'll notice a lot of like fucking sages and philosophers say. It's the idea that like you can learn something from any man you meet. He could be an idiot. It could be a guy who doesn't know anything. They could actually teach you something. Whereas if you notice, the implicit problem most pros are having is anyone who's even slightly below me cannot teach me anything. Whereas that's an insane concept. And by the way, like that could be its own digression right there, because the biggest problem in esports, if I had to talk about it cognitively, is how many people think that like knowledge is a linear set of chain of understanding. So for example, they think because I don't talk about the tactic of a round that I just don't understand tactics. I mean, if you ever read my Twitter, I can read shit that's happening in the game before it even happens. But the point is, as you were saying before, you can't watch everything in the game at once. So since I know on the desk, I've got the best guys in the world. I've got fucking Sponge and Yanko and the Pimp. Like, I leave them to do the tactics. When I watch the game, I watch it from different metrics that they can't. Like, I do player performance evaluation. I do stylistic mismatches. I look for angles where I feel like someone made a psychological decision that impacted the game. I do that so that the idea is I'm going to let them talk about the tactical part of the game, which, by the way, requires all your attention to do that part. And then I'm going to fill in interesting conversation and points around that. And at the end, what the fan thinks is, well, tactics must be the top of the chain of the ladder. And then they're like, you're on like level 2, Thor, and you just know like the players and then like what they're doing. And you don't know the rest. It's like, no, knowledge isn't like that, guys. And you couldn't be. It couldn't be.
Yeah. So what Toxic was doing was basically explicit hypothesis testing. He had an idea of what the game should be like or how the game should be played, and he was, developing his routine by actually applying it and seeing how it works out against basically mid-tier players, or in another sense, live target practice.
Yeah.
I mean, your practice is what you make of it. Like, you have to understand like the dichotomy of explicit and implicit learning. So explicit learning is when you have someone teaching you or explaining it to you, or you develop an idea and you go and test it. Implicit learning is just learning while doing. So basically, League of Legends, Counter-Strike, when you play those games, you're implicitly learning. No one starts off as an expert in League of Legends.
Of course.
So basically, it's emergent learning. You learn while you're doing, and that's how implicit learning happens. LS says, the NA is disadvantaged because the training partners aren't necessarily the best. I agree and disagree at the same time. I think your practice is what you make of it, in the sense that if you have bad practice partners that you cannot learn implicitly from while playing, then you should, make your practice time very explicit. All right, NA isn't doing very well. They're not very strong. Like, you're not making much of practice. Look at the strongest region. Look at what they're doing. Develop an understanding of what they're doing, and then use your practice to apply it. I'll give you an example from like a friend of mine who's trying to learn table tennis. And I tell him, listen, you can't play against strong players and weak players the exact same way.
Yes.
So, and he didn't understand at first. I told him, listen, against a stronger player, you're just going to end up defending, because they're going to overwhelm you with their attack. So you're going to learn how to defend,
Yes.
You're going to develop your defense. But if you're just going to play the same defensive way against a weaker player who gives you much more opportunities to attack, you're not going to learn anything. So you take that into like League of Legends. When you're fighting, like, for example, when we're like Koreans, like super dominant, like season 4, season 5, when it was their vision meta.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, all right, you can't deal with that. Like, they're gonna outplay you, right? They're gonna destroy you when you play them in a live match. Practice, I don't know what happens behind closed doors, but you can see what's going on. Then you can try to apply it. When you use it, you learn about it. You learn what the deficiencies are, what it helps you do, what it scaffolds you to be able to do, and you learn how teams, fight against it, and then you practice it. Because if you're just going to go into a script, say, oh, this team's so shit, I'm just going to, play whatever, you're not getting anything out of it. You have to recognize when it's a chance to learn implicitly and where there's a chance to learn explicitly.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a good example of that. Because what's funny is, much like I've just stumbled across things by trial and error, or just coming up with my own wacky theory, and then what I do is, if I ever look into the field, usually I find out, like, oh, there's a term for that, or it's a whole principle, or there's even more that I didn't think of. Like, I could have extended that concept. One area where I've noticed other people figure things out, but they just do it, like, they figure out a tiny piece and they don't see the jigsaw, is a friend of mine who was also a great thinker about Counter-Strike, is a guy called Lurpis, Tommy Kovanen. He's a Finnish guy who now works with Immortals, and in the past he was like an in-game leader in 1.6, and he was even a commentator for a lot of like an analyst in CSGO in the early days. And one of the things he had as a theory, but he never worked with it, like worked the idea out, it's just something he came up with, is he noticed that when you're one of the best teams in the world, it doesn't matter how much you practice and how well you try to play and how you map veto, you will always, a certain percentage of the time, get upsets against teams that are clearly worse than you, that just don't make sense. It's like it was our map and our players are way better. And yeah, sure, we couldn't scout them, but we wouldn't have needed to. Like, they're so bad. And what he realized was, he had a strategy to overcoming this, which, by the way, this is actually literally one of those things where I've told people, I said this publicly, and I consider it a revolutionary thought. No one else in Counter-Strike ever fucking listened to it. The principle he had went like this. When you play the bad teams in Counter-Strike, they usually are just playing off aim and very basic position and decision-making individually. So what happens is, if you use your high-level tactics and the kind of stuff you'd use to try and beat Astralis, he didn't use the example of Astralis. I'm using this to make it more modern day for everyone. Well, if you're playing Astralis, like for example, when Team Liquid plays Astralis is a great example because Team Liquid keeps losing because there'll be these weird pocket moments within a round where Astralis like pushes a man into an area and just holds that area. And just from the info from that area, they can now decide which site to gamble on, or they can kill a guy who tries to flank around onto that area. And what happens is Team Liquid is just not that good at reading when they do that. Now, here's the thing. If they played with the kind of respect that they do against Astralis, against everyone else, you'd have never heard of Team Liquid. They wouldn't be the team that just rolls over every other team and batters the fuck out of them. But here's what's funny is Lurpus's theory basically was when I play against bad teams, and that point in the tournament is just like survive, get to the part where you play the good teams, and then you try and win the money. What you should do is don't use tactics. Literally just pog it. Play off basic skill. Do exactly what they're doing and just have the same strength, each of you, but your strength's of a way better version of it. And you batter them completely. You don't try to play tactically at all. And then a second like corollary factor that he never bothered saying was this actually has mad implicit value because not only will you be more likely to win the game, but second, because also, by the way, they're not going to do anything that surprises you because you're all playing basic Counter-Strike. But the second part that he never actually bothered verbalizing, which was even more genius in my opinion, is now all the teams that are going to play you in the next round, who are the real team, who's watching your game, get nothing. Because you're not going to play like that against them. You're going to play completely differently based on what team that is, because they're a pro team and the other guys were just 5 guys.
Yeah.
But in Counter-Strike, don't some of the pro teams... In fact, I think Astralis does that a lot against the tier 4, tier 5 teams at the beginning of tournaments. Just end up playing their non-favorite maps. So then they don't have to reveal their nuke or their inferno.
Astralis is an outlier in that sense. Like they're one of the few ones who knows to do that. Like here's the key thing is you've nailed there that if they do that, it's for that reason. It's that they know, listen, we're probably going to win anyway. And obviously they're so serious they will have practiced those maps. But they're also thinking like you're saying, the reason you have to be Astralis to do it is you have to be on such another level that you know you'll still win, but that when you play the later guy, you want to also limit his possible information. Other people can't do that. Like normal teams, you have to just try for your best map because you might not even win the game. Like you can't start thinking 4 chess moves ahead. So, for example, when other people appear to do something like that, like a great example is, I think everyone knows who's followed my career, I'm a huge fan of Carrigan because I actually think this guy is a genius in the pick ban phase, but he's not doing that. He's not trying to hide strats, not least because his style isn't to have like a strat book that you can read anyway. What he's doing when he does the like weird map picks is just constantly trying to punish you for wherever you're weak. He's just maximizing his chance, to win the overall series. But listen, what you're saying is totally correct, but that's also one of the reasons why Astralis is ahead. It's why, again, to tie it back into the fan thing, that's why you can't beat a fan who has this limited end state. Because since they think that their knowledge is total, they can always find a way within their current understanding to rationalize what's happening. So what happens is when Astralis dominates tactically and they do all these clever things you're talking about, and they always make the correct map veto against the right team so that they get a slight edge on the third, everything they do correctly, all the fan sees is, well, because they're picking the right map and they practice right, they get more kills and they die less, and so the score looks better, and then the score... And so what is the thing that everyone's seen on Reddit and in HLTV a million times? Like, when I say my famous line, I always said Team Liquid is the most skilled lineup ever. And then to really fuck with them, because it's true, I said, I think Evil Genius is probably the second most skilled team now. An Astralis fan will go, that can't be right though, because Astralis beats these teams. And you know what? Sometimes when Astralis beats them, the Team Liquid player has a bad game and the Astralis player has more kills. It's like, yeah, and you know what? Believe it or not, none of that had to do with any of the skill. Like, it was everything but the skill. But if you only have the prism of skill, you will have to evaluate it that way. Obviously, in your mind, it can't be the guy with 14 kills could be better than the guy with 25. Even though we all know if we've played one game of Counter-Strike, you can have a shit game and then look at the score, like, what the hell, I've got like 20 kills here. You can have a game where you feel like you hit a load of 6 shots and you're like, wait, I have 12 kills? Like, I'll give you a great example of a player like that. I said this on Twitter, but I even told him privately. I already was known as a massive fan of Elige. I think he's an amazing player. But I was watching him like everyone. I was watching the Team Liquid, and I was seeing whatever the Observer sees. And I was watching, like highlight clips or whatever. But when I went and I basically got his games and I only watched his POV over and over again, I was like, holy fuck. Like, if this guy gets 18 kills in a game, he'll still get like 90 ADR. So way more ADR than another probably would with that kills. Like he'll always do damage almost every fight. And then his decision making, I'm not exaggerating because unfortunately people have used this cliche too much, but I don't often. He legitimately plays as if he has a wall hack on at all times. Like it was unbelievable the amount of times that even Astralis would have done a very good fake that his teammates bought and be sneaking into an area. I think there was even a game today he did it where like He just did like someone was waiting behind like a wall where they had no reason to know he was there. And it was actually a crazy flank. And then the guy peeked out and he just killed him instantly. And that just shows you that like this guy, in terms of like his understanding of the game, was just on another level. Where do we go with this now?
Can I just address the point on learning League of Legends, Counter-Strike, and how language comes into it? Because so obviously I can only talk from my own experience on this, but
everyone really should, ideally.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, but it did remind me of this this one interaction I had with some other teams I played in Counter-Strike, because it's very different communication in Counter-Strike compared to League. In League, you're basically just pinging. It doesn't matter if you're playing with Koreans or...
Don't you find it funny that people who are in League and Dota, this is a real thing they all do even at the pro level, they think we're idiots in CS for having 5 people from one country. They're like, but look, we want TI with this guy. And then you hear them inside the game, they're just screaming the person's name or the ultimate. And I always say to them, you are aware we have a stat in Counter-Strike that holds to this day. With the exception of Gambit Gaming, which essentially didn't actually break what I'm about to say the rule, they actually, with the exception that proves it, every team that ever won a major was 5 people from one country. Now, the only reason that doesn't work with Gambit, but it does, it's because they're all from fucking countries that were in the Soviet Union and speak Russian. So really, like, they sort of just have got the hack to that. Every other team ever, no exaggeration, so like FaZe had one of the best teams. Any team that had any more than 2 nationalities literally couldn't win.
Yeah. And I think, so I'm pretty sure you did a video on that, Duncan, regarding international teams.
Yeah.
And well, what I was going to talk about was so Counter-Strike. I've always played with Western Europeans, and everyone speaks English on the servers. Yes. No problem there. I learned how to how to call spots and every position in the maps. I know the call out in English.
Sure.
And then one day, because as I'm half French, I ended up playing with a team of French guys. So then I was just calling the spots out in English because that's how I knew them, and then no one understood what I meant because they only knew the call outs in French. And then I realized, damn, I'm actually going to have to learn the call outs in French just to play with these guys. So that's okay, but then I'm going to have to keep that in the back of my mind before I make any call out, and that's going to distract me from trying to shoot that other guy in the head.
Yes.
And on top of that, because I've been playing for years in English call outs, it's going to take not just learning in a different language, but also de-learning, if that's a word, unlearning the English one, so that they don't become part of my reflexes in a game that's like fraction of seconds is life or death. So I think for the casual, it's also pretty hard to adjust to different languages, especially if English isn't your first. And when at the pro level, you have players like you have teams like MIBR who change from Portuguese to English. It's not just, well, I'll just explain the strats in English. It's also, guys, you need to be able to quickly find the word for that call out as soon as you see an enemy. And if you've done that for 10 years in Portuguese, it's not going to be an overnight change.
Sure. Sure.
So, yeah, that was my...
I mean, what's funny is I can actually tie that in again to advanced concepts in Counter-Strike, because there's another area people don't understand is, like, think about all the terminology I just made. Well, how do we even know? Like, in theory they do, because nowadays there's a lot of cross-pollination between the scenes. But back in, like, pre-internet being as global as it was, when kind of like French people went on French websites, Swedish people went on Swedish sites, one of the things that people don't realize is they might not have even the same concept as us. They might not have a term for that. And so there's certain regions were literally behind in terms of even basic knowledge of what they were doing in the game. So I can give you actually 3 examples off the top of my head of teams that come from totally different countries that got ahead of the curve in Counter-Strike in a way that Western, even Europeans and even North Americans didn't even understand at all. So one is a very recent example, which is when that big clan, God B's team, I mean, he's retired now, but God B, Tabson, Smooya, those guys, when last year they made that crazy run to the final of Cologne, every idiot went, oh, see, you told me they were all shit players, don't they? They're fucking amazing. It's like, no, the team's actually legit. Like, what the fuck are they doing with this team? I started studying them. I started reading every interview, started listening to videos and watching. As far as I can tell, they're one of those teams that has just gone way more comprehensive than some other teams with even basic map naming spots and like how many extra angles you can add on and different things. So whereas even like a lot of NA players, no joke, just use the simple concept. So for example, they're like, oh, he's in the I don't know, fucking dark on this map, right? But that might actually refer to a whole area that's like in the game, like 10 meters squared. Whereas what they'd do instead was they'd have like a couple of extra names, their own unique ones as well, for another part. So there's one area where you can see how having a way inferior lineup, they were able to have greater team play and this amazing utility usage. Because there's the idea. You don't just say, he's in water on overpass and then nade water. You say like, blah, blah, blah in German. And then that means like he's on the little boost that goes under the little window. And then so if you nade there, you kill him. And so it wasn't that they were geniuses. Well, they were. God B's a genius. The rest of them were just following orders. 2 other examples that are similar, but different. And this is interesting. So one thing we found out, and we only found this out because the North American player Hiko, who was in Team Liquid and Cloud9, before Simple came to Team Liquid, the reason he came to Team Liquid is Hiko went and did the other thing before. He stood in for Simple's team, which was Flipside, like the 3rd best CIS team at the time, ESWC in like, I think it was 2014. No, it must have been 2015 off the top of my head. They even beat NIP at this tournament, believe it or not. And what happened was, when he was in this team, their in-game leader was a legendary figure. People in CSGO don't know how legendary this guy is. He's Blade, the guy who's currently the coach of Na'Vi. And the thing about him as an in-game leader was, the reason he had a completely different system in the game is he probably invented all of that from level 1 with no input outside. He just created his own version of the game. And he'd literally been a leader in CS, no joke, from like not long after I started in CS. And people just don't know because he was just grinding for years in Ukraine when they weren't relevant as a country. And so what Hiko found when he went in this team as an NA guy is he was thinking, right, I'm obviously not going to know the call-outs, but can you just translate some of them for me? And they were like, what do you mean by call-outs though? And what it turned out was, in Flipside, you don't do call-outs. He divided every bomb site and key area mathematically into like quadrant rectangles, and you had to learn that system. So if you were the guy who was the entry fragger and went down mid on cash, you would know your little route. It was almost like being an American football player. You wouldn't know everyone else's route. You wouldn't know, but you'd do that. And the idea was, over time, they would have, again, tactically, it was like he'd made a chessboard to move the pieces around on. The third example, which is similar, not as good, because it's from longer ago, I'm going back in time here, is at the end of 1.6, when I went to a bunch of tournaments in China and Korea, there was the first tournaments where you could go and not just interview a player that was speaking one of those languages, because none of them spoke English at the time, but you could potentially have a translator who might follow the game. Therefore, he could give you like more insight in the game. And I remember I did an interview with Solo, who was the best Korean player probably ever. He actually was playing until recently. And what he told me, well, what his manager told me was amazing, which is because it turns out he has the same thing I do, which is like, he doesn't have extreme, but he has like half color blindness. So there's certain colors that just, if they're next to each other, they look like the same. And even in contrast against other things, they can be slightly off. And so the problem was, because so many of the spots in the game revolve around like the scale that, like the color scale that something is, or even calling it like brown heart, like yellow thing, like, because it was all this, right? You might think to yourself, this is how hilarious Koreans are. You might think to yourself, why doesn't he just learn what the yellow one is by heart? And it doesn't matter if you can't see yellow. Remember, that's yellow hot. What he did instead, though, because they were Koreans, it's because he was the best player and the oldest, they thought, right, we should just adapt our entire fucking brains to everything he can't do. So what they did is they numbered everything. And they would literally, that's why when they had tactics, they were amazing. Because someone knew, like, I throw a flash at this position 7, he throws it at position 4, I move to position 6, he pulls on to 2, and they would literally do this like the fucking, it's almost like those coordinated gymnasts or whatever, where they're so perfect. And you think, how can they be doing this? It's mad rote practice, I'm afraid. Sadly, it's not some like genius intuition. They just literally get like brutalized until they learn it. So you can see in these 3 different areas how not only if you're joining this team, holy fuck, you're not plugging and playing in any of these teams. You're like going to school again to learn. Which is why, by the way, guess what? People don't want to join Flipside and play under Blade. They're like, fuck this, I'll go back to the other team where we just call things and do what we want. But you can see how in their own ways you'd get an edge, or you'd have some area you could be stronger in that the own opponent couldn't even guess why you were stronger. Because you're not playing the same game he is, basically.
I mean, that's just basically economizing effort through defined terminology. They have a clear concept, they have a clear term, so it's easier to communicate and it's easier to get the idea across, is basically what you're saying, right?
Sure.
Yeah, like an example from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, there's this guy called Eddie Bravo, and he has the 10th Planet Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Sure.
One of the things, like, the general Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community was making fun of him for initially. I'm not sure about now because I don't follow it anymore. But like they were making fun of the names he called techniques. It's like rubber guard or, crotch splitter, stuff like that.
The truck, all those, yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
the truck. So they made fun of him initially for that.
Yes.
But then like his premise was, listen, I'm tired of saying, all right, get into okay, no, your leg's here. No, this,
exactly.
Yeah, it's like if I say this, it's clear exactly where I want him to be. If someone's like one of my trainers is calling me on the phone and he's like, when my leg's here and I'm hooking his heel from there and I'm doing this and he says, no, when I'm in the truck, he knows exactly what they're talking about here. So it just makes it easier to communicate, and it just takes so much less effort, which is a great thing, I think.
Yeah. No, the funny thing is, I mean, I actually know quite a bit about him. He's someone where you've nailed exactly his biggest strength that idiots don't get. It's not that he was ever the best jiu-jitsu fighter or teacher. It's that he basically defined way more things and built a coherent system so that when you came into his system, you leveled up really quickly. Whereas, for example, when I first got into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which I didn't do for very long, I did a couple of years, but I was just always following the UFC and MMA, so I wanted to learn it on the side to know what they were doing. When I first got into it, I actually paid, if you want to get into Brazilian jiu-jitsu, if you want to go really next level, there's one of the best fighters ever. It's called, I can't remember his surname, Marcelo or something or other, but I can't remember his surname. He's a very, very high level Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Garcia, there you go. He's obviously a Brazilian guy as well. And he actually has, he's in New York. He actually has a thing where you can pay a subscription fee, and every month he's putting up tons of videos. I'm talking about insane, to the point now where he's built like a whole tree. You can just click like arm locks, fucking 50 arm locks and 100 videos come out. Like the amount of content's amazing. But here's the thing, the way he's doing it, he's like you're describing there. He's telling you roughly what he's doing, and then he's doing the thing that I hate anyone who's a teacher doing, going, right, watch me do it. And it's like, mate, you're about to do 50 things that you've chained together that to you are obvious and implicit, that I can't see anything you're doing there. It's like when you try and learn a language, the worst thing is, when someone tries to help you and they say, no, you're not saying that right in Russian, and then they just say it and you try and say it, and then they keep going, no, you're not saying what I'm saying. It's like, I am, I just don't know all the subtlety of what fucking sounds you're making, mate. Like a perfect example is, I'll give you a very quick one. To say hello in Korean, I can tell anyone in the world how to do it. Think of 4 words. It goes Annyeong ha, 5. Annyeong ha seyo. If you can say that slightly faster than that, a Korean person will say hello if they speak English, right? Here's the problem though. No Korean you will never hear with your ear a Korean say annyeonghaseyo. What they will, unless they're talking to a foreigner, what they say sounds like annyeonghaseyo. Now, if you go around saying annyeonghaseyo, not a single fucking person in this world will ever understand what you're meaning, including Koreans. Because what's really happening there, I learned over time living in Korea, is they are saying what I said at the beginning, those 5 syllables, but they're saying it so fluidly and with such subtlety that unless your ear is totally tuned in, you'll never get the last parts and the part that's extended. It's like, you will think they said what I said secondly, and you'll be fucked.
Yeah.
That was the dead end. Don't know where that went. Well, it's a good story, though, wasn't it? Nice little anecdote there. Now you can see the sort of ridiculous shit I was doing in Korea, just trying to figure out what people saying hello or whatever. Like, I must study this, break it apart. I'm the only one who will know. Does someone else have another topic we can go with? Come on.
Yeah, so still related. In terms of coaching, I know we've come a long way, but how do you see it? What do you think is a good coach these days? What should be the ideal characteristics? Is it just one person is the head coach and then one person is the position coach or something like that. What's still missing to have?
Put it this way. I don't think we've come a long way. That is just media hype, and that's also people who used to know nothing, learning a little bit and go, bloody hell, I know everything. Whereas, like, as the old adage goes, as you add to the bonfire of knowledge, you should reveal more of the darkness of ignorance. You should know, holy fuck, by learning this much, I realise how far we've got to go. So what's crazy is, even the Zonics of the world, like, I'm not going to literally imply I know everything he knows, but a lot of the concepts that he's a revolution that he's brought in are literally things I'd read in other fields of coaching. And I used to tell pro players, like, one of the maddest ones ever, this is so insane because people could have made millions of dollars off this. I told someone, it was actually Lurpis, who's a friend of mine, I told him in 2010, you do know, right now, I could get you some basic stats software that will produce heat maps of what the opponent is doing. And in the NBA, when you want to defend someone, you give the defender heat maps and you tell him, listen, you can't stop LeBron James scoring. But if you can drive him to his left and make him shoot a fadeaway jump shot, he only shoots 44%. If he goes to the basket, he makes 79%. So all the defender now does is, oh, fuck that, I don't have to stop LeBron James. I should have to drive him left. And if you do that, by the way, it doesn't matter if he's LeBron James. He still will actually do worse in the game. And I told Lurpis, you know, this could instantly be used and no one else even knows this. You could win so many Counter-Strike tournaments because what we're going to do is, at the time, the concept of anti-stratting, people took it too literally. They would look at exactly where the players were and what they did, and their version of anti-strat was like, right, he always stands at this spot, so throw the grenades there. And it's like, mate, if he's even slightly off, that does nothing. So what I told him instead is, the heat map will just tell you the literal tendencies of the player, and even better, your eye can't lie to you. You can't see a couple of rounds where it happens. I think he does that all the time. You'll see actually, oh, he doesn't actually. Nearly always when a grenade goes here, he's moving to this area. Well, if you knew that, and if even a couple of your players had some sense of what value that had, you could literally have won like $1 million tournaments with this and won thousands and thousands and so many great matches that you would have the edge in. You would have this little aspect. So nowadays, certain players have adapted certain aspects of that. Most of them haven't. That's why, actually, by the way, people like Nico are also geniuses. He doesn't even know what the fuck I'm talking about when I just said all that there. He just knows he gets an AK and shoots you in the head. That's it. That's why he's a genius. He's a genius in a way because he's so dumb in the other areas. So I mean that actually compliment and diss, basically. And so I would just say this. Most real world concepts from coaching have never been brought in because those people are on such a high level, they do not ever interact with esports. Like, you know, when you hear about, Astralis brought in this sports psychologist, can't be a good one then, can it? Because that would be working for a fucking superstar NFL team or the best Olympic swimmer in the world or a fucking chess master. They wouldn't be joining Astralis for whatever they get paid and come around. That means you've got the first sports psychologist, or you've got an okay sports, or you're like Weldon Green, where you just wanted to be a sports psychologist and could play one on television. Like, in this scenario, that's the big problem we have, is we're getting the most low level, like kindergarten 101 shit, and people are like, God damn, we just fucking revolutionized the game. It's like, we didn't. We're so far behind basic things. Like, when you ask that question, what should the structure be? First of all, the type of coach you have and the structure you have in a team can never be, there's no one system that would be that good. Like, you know what, I'll tell you right now, put Zonic on FaZe and you will see a man fail. And he'll try his absolute best and he will look like a fucking idiot. And that's why everyone makes fun of Yanko, a tactical guy who's in a team that wouldn't want that strength. It wants all the other strengths that have nothing to do with that. So basically, I always say this, nobody in theory decides the style or the maps that they play in Counter-Strike. What they do is the smart people who lead the teams identify their personnel, what their strengths are individually, what collectively their strengths are, and then they look at the bloody maps and try them in practice and go, right, that's why when a fan goes, why don't they just practice Mirage? Like, shut up, you idiot. Like, that's, for all you know, they don't have anyone who can play the B site, and then they just get exploited all day, and they might have the best A site in the world, and they're dead. There we go. In fact, Na'Vi basically used to be a description of what I just said, by the way. Like, they used to be shit on Mirage, but they should have been the best in the world because Simple dominated everyone at the A site. So what's funny in this scenario is, fuck, let me think. I was going there. I lost it for a second. Get it back on. Oh, that's right. It was about like setting up the personnel. So what I would say is this. Ideally, you want to do it based on your team. Like if you're a team like FaZe, realistically, FaZe is looking for an old school sports coach, like a motivational guy, a guy who punches the right guy in the arm when he needs to pick up, the guy who puts his arm around the kid who's a bit worried and tells him, come on, son, like you're going to do it in this game. Don't worry, they'll take care of you. Like they probably need that guy. Whereas if you are Astralis, You want Zonic to basically be another tactical mind, and you want him to coordinate on a meta level that Glaive doesn't have to think about even. And so I would just say this. For tactical teams, we've got a ways to go because Astralis is so far ahead and so outlier that if you want to catch up, basically the sport to watch, it's amazing I didn't follow this sport for so many years because I just naively myself only saw the surface level. It's American football. The way American football offense is run is the closest to a Counter-Strike T-side. So what you need is, anyone who follows the NFL knows this, there are very few coaches who literally make all the calls. They have an offensive coordinator. That's his job. The idea is the head coach makes the overall decisions anyway. So what happens is the offensive coordinator sometimes directly communicates to the quarterback, or they feed that information and the head coach could maybe overrule it. But this is where I've made a video about this in the past, but this is where another misnomer wrecks everyone. Every fan, and colloquially in Counter-Strike, we've ruined the word strategy. People think strategy is a strat, and a strat is basically, by definition, a tactic. Well, strategy and tactics, strategy is like the general approach you are going to take, the over-encompassing philosophy. The tactic is the specific move within the philosophy that executes that philosophy. So if you know that angle, then you know actually that with certain teams even, I would say Carrigan largely is strategically leading his teams. He's looking at the stylistic approach, at the overall game, and he's trusting players to win duels and take care of that. He's not micromanaging on that level, but he's still doing a very high-level advanced approach. Someone like Glaive, at least in the past, a lot of the players, I think, know a lot of this stuff implicitly. Now, he would be moving people around like a chessboard and moving this guy to here and back. And maybe the player doesn't even know why he's being moved, but he just knows if I follow the plan, it works. So, again, I think it depends on the types of players you have. I would even say go further. I'd say things like, depends on the culture, depends on like the level of communication you're able to get out of these guys. Sadly, depends on how smart they are. Like certain teams, I wouldn't attempt a very tactical style. Like it would actually be worse. It's one of the reasons, funnily enough, if we want to tie it back into that example of League of Legends, it's another reason why Western teams couldn't sometimes be as good. They were taking concepts from the Korean teams that they weren't at all on the level of and maybe never could have been some of their players. So it was the equivalent of like a dumb guy just finding like a mathematical book on the floor and just seeing like a bunch of equations, and he could vaguely understand some of the letters and thinking like, well, if I sort of use it every now and then, that sort of work, right? And it's like, well, it won't, but you know, maybe a better example there would have been like physics, because I guess you could say like Newtonian physics still work, even if in theory they're not supposed to be the most accurate. Maybe that would be a better analogy, because it sort of work, right, if you copy Koreans.
I wanted, like, if Peter wants to add something. Yeah, so what I wanted to add here was that, like, coaching and the meta, I can't really comment on Counter-Strike, but like from what I know about League of Legends are in a really limited end state. So you oftentimes cite that players in League of Legends, you know, they're 14 years old and that's when they get picked up, you know, 14 to 16, that's when they get picked up. They're never really entrenched in the system of coaching, so they don't have an idea about coaching. Now, I think it's fair to say that most current coaches in League of Legends are people that have come up from being players. Right? Yes. Yeah. So if or analysts, you know, one of the two. Yeah. So if they were as players not coached, and then they come up and become coaches, then you know their coaching is a limited end state in the sense that they've never experienced this kind of coaching. Sure. Like I'll put it this way: you cannot convince me that all the tactics and strategies from traditional sports have been explored and applied to League of Legends. Not even vaguely, mate. We haven't scratched the surface, I can tell you. Exactly. Like I'll give you an example. Like the concept of man to man is like when you put someone at it can even be more than 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 in traditional sports, is when you your job is to just make this guy's life shit. You just don't let him play, right? I've watched a lot of League of Legends, and the first time I've seen something even vaguely similar to that was SKT versus G2. And who's the G2 jungler? Jankos. Yeah. Yeah, he was on Olaf, and it was sort of like zone defense or man to man, but like his job, there was a team fight near the river, and his job was to just keep Faker on Kiana out of the fight. Like all he did was just stand there and keep Faker out, and someone came in to help Faker, but they ended up winning the team fight just because he zoned Faker out. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, and then when you think about the meta, or you were talking about the guy who picks up a physics book or a maths book, or basically the essence or the gist of it, what I got was someone doing something because they see it succeed, but they don't know why it succeeds. Or maybe they only know part of it a tiny bit. Yeah. So that's one concept where I think by definition, Monte Cristo for coming up with the idea of a win condition.
Exactly.
You know, as someone who has gone through this concept, which is needs analysis. So basically, why a certain meta develops a certain way is because. So first of all, limited end state also happens because of your previous experience. So in Korea, you've got coaches who come from StarCraft, right?
Sure.
And then, you know, their previous experience, it sort of like directs their attention because they don't have enough attention to pay attention to everything. So their previous experience with StarCraft makes them, you know, makes things become obvious and salient to them. So, oh, yeah, this is what we should learn. This is what we should do. We should, you know, like Fog of War is something that can transfer, like as a concept, can transfer from RTS games to MOBA games. So they, like, the way they deal with Fog of War is going to be colored by their understanding of Fog of War in RTS games. So that's their background, right? So then they develop a meta, and then like Korean League of Legends is dominating, so the West sees it and then they copy it. Now, because they haven't done the same needs analysis and figuring out, you know, and understanding why they came to this conclusion, what they take it is they copy it and then they apply it, like not necessarily in a perfect way, not necessarily without knowing, without knowing all the dimensions of it. It's like a 2D understanding of a 3D object, if that makes sense.
Lower resolution, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. So they apply it, but they, like, because they didn't go through the same thought process of understanding why it happened or why that sort of meta developed. When they apply it, it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be as good, and they're not going to, you know, execute it as well. The other thing is, when I talked about like the correct selective pressure, the selective pressure you're facing in Korea when you're practicing, when you're playing live games, is different than that selective pressure that you're facing, you know, in NA or in Europe or in any of those places. So whatever organic meta develops in those regions isn't like, it's always going to be limited in the sense that it hasn't been tested. Like in Counter-Strike, you've got a global circuit where every team has a chance to face every team. Like even the worst teams can maybe face Astralis, which is, I think, one of the best teams right now, in pools or something like that. In the term
beginning first match, first match, group stage.
Yeah, group stage. It's pools and fighting games.
Yeah.
So group stage, you know. So what ends up happening is like you've got a king of the hill type meta in CS:GO. You look at the best team, what they're doing, and you're either, you know, trying to develop a counter meta or you're trying to perfect what they're doing. But in League of Legends, it's like, you know, twice a year you meet up and you try to figure out whose meta is the best, right? So it's always going to be limited in the sense that you're not practicing it against every type of opponent. That's why one video you had was like the global meta is wrong or something. You referenced Keen and Power of Evil. Yeah. So that was a great, because what you went through is there. Power of Evil, when he goes off meta, these are picks that he's really well versed at. So, you know, he can, in any situation, he can pull them out. What I'm saying is with the meta is, just because this is the current dominant meta, it doesn't mean that because, you know, the Koreans came up with it, Europe came up with it, whatever, I'm in an inferior region, I cannot think outside the box and come up with something that can defeat it. Just because it's the most dominant right now doesn't mean it's reached a state of, it's not an asymptote. It's not a curve that's infinitely approaching, you know, a line that reaches an absolute, a practical end. You know, it's like so close to perfect that nothing can ever overcome it until like a patch comes in. So in terms of coaching, I don't think coaches have explored everything. I don't think the coaching structures that are available right now explore everything. I don't think they understand explicit learning, implicit learning, learning theory, and how to engage with their players, why my player is facing a certain problem.
By the way, there's an area right now where I would, if I was actually them, invest. Bring someone in who knows basically the topic you're talking about and explain to them how they're communicating. What, you know, like they haven't even done any of these things, mate. In fact, I'll give you a great example. This is what's funny. Because Koreans were so dominant for so long in the old way League of Legends worked, people just, in fact, I've told Monty off for this so many times privately because I actually knew more about some of the Koreans. He was massively putting them on a pedestal in a way that wasn't justified. He didn't understand, like, first of all, like 70% of what makes Korea good is built in. It's their version of fucked up Protestant work ethic. It's just Korean work ethic and this concept of duty and the idea you have to practice your hardest. So all they're doing is maximizing the talent base. Then they would also have so many good players and they'd have a whole bunch of loads of coaching staff that would figure out basic concepts and apply it in the game. But here's what's funny. The way you know Koreans weren't the gods and didn't understand the game, they weren't like fucking Neo reading the Matrix, is this. This year, I know maybe you didn't watch much this year, but this year, the reason why G2, I know in the end they lost to FPX, but they were the best team in the world and they were better than all the Korean teams. And what's funny is idiot European fans will be like, Europe is better. It's like, no, only G2. Yeah. And the reason why G2 was better was when Koreans would play, some of the knowledge base they'd build up about what is League of Legends and what concepts and general paradigms apply in different states of the game, not only were not the best, some of them didn't apply anymore. And so there would actually be scenarios. You can go watch in Korea, if like Griffin played SKT or something, they would have matches where in a certain moment in the game, the person ahead would literally choose not to push his advantage. He wouldn't go for another aggressive move. He wouldn't go and occupy an area and just waste time, but if they go there, then you catch them out and you kill them entirely. They wouldn't do these certain things. So basically what was happening was, when you played and you were two Korean teams, you both had a knowledge base that was too directly connected and basically came from the same source that nobody did the counter to your style of play. Yeah. And what they found when they went international, this is the reason why SKT was trying their fucking hardest in these games this year. Against MSI, they were up 2-1 and almost won the 4th game. At Worlds, they thought that we're ahead every time. And the reason why essentially on some level they were never ahead is because they didn't have the fundamental understanding. In the same way as Astralis can beat Team Liquid in these very small areas, G2's areas on the map that they could exploit, or where they could go into fog of war without vision and they could potentially catch you or surprise you, they didn't even have this as a possibility. It didn't exist for them. And even worse, all their best competition lived in the same world where it didn't exist. And so it was almost like some sort of fucked up scenario where like they just had pockets of the map they could move through, and it's almost like G2 could just go through walls, and that's the thing, just in this analogy, you know, like they had areas they could just go through and get advantages you couldn't have seen if you were Korean. So actually what's funny is I was really flaming them hard to listen local because that's just my style, but I actually feel sorry for them. For once, the Koreans were the ones like a fucking dog looking at a card trick, like, what the fuck's he doing? I don't know. It seems like he's enjoying it, you know, like they had no clue. It was hilarious. And I actually think right now, I can't wait for the next few years because I want to know, will it go back enough that they're suddenly the geniuses again? Or will they actually, this would be amazing, spend the next few years just lost in the wilderness with the best players, but no real like high level conception of the game?
You see, this is because their previous experience is blinding them to how the game should be played or what's different about the game. I'll give you an example. So like, let's say there's a team fight meta, right? And then the answer that someone came up with would be like a split push meta.
Sure.
So because of this, because of your experience with success with split pushing against team fighting, what's going to happen in the future is like if the game develops towards a team fight meta again, because your previous experience is there, what you're going to think, oh, let's split push again, right? Let's go split pushing against it because that worked in the past. But the game has changed, so then split pushing isn't necessarily the option anymore, because teams can burst. If you just get a split push, they're just gonna go take 2 or 3 towers and be at your base. That the game is in such a state that can happen. So when you end up doing split pushing, you're gonna lose because they're just gonna race you to the base and just completely destroy it. So then the conclusion you have to come to is that, all right, we have to meet them head on. The problem, I would say, with Korea in that context is that their previous experience was blinding them to so there's this thing called psychological salience. So because your previous experience was something, it blinds you to something else. Like it blinds you to what's at hand right now. So because of their previous experience with the meta and their dominance and all of that, they're blind to what's going on right now. And because they can't play G2 and get, all year round and get that selective pressure there for them to learn from it, they're not going to learn.
Yeah. No, and that's what's funny is like I say, unless Riot has inadvertently made the game more in their favor of how their paradigm works, I don't actually think they will figure it out next year and be the best. Because the funny thing is, this is how funny Koreans are as well. This is how Koreans are they're still stuck in their world, their bubble. Because what was their approach when some of these teams weren't able to do it? Fire the old players. It's obviously old players. New players will know the game. Then fire the coach. The coach obviously doesn't. And it's like, listen, you're right. The first part of that's right. Those players and coaches don't know it. Your problem is you don't have coaches and players who do know it that you're replacing them with. So all you're actually doing, funnily enough, is just doing talent churn. And so guess what? When you brought up Griffin and Damwon and Sandbox, they're all fucking sick players. They are the next generation of players. Didn't help though. They still lost all the big games that mattered, So it's one of those areas where this is also why you should never be arrogant in esports, because I mean, I would say even traditional sports, what I like about them, this is why I never understood the oversaturation angle, is that would only ever make sense if the game was solved. If it was like fucking, I think they say checkers is solved or something, you know, like in theory a computer could just play it correctly every time. The whole point of chess and games like Go is they will never be solved in theory. Like in theory, there will always be like room for variation, and there will actually be like counter, like famously when they did the AI computer played Go against the best Korean Go players, it did win most of the matches. But then what happened is the Korean player figured out, if I do this move that's essentially insanely illogical, it will never be able to know what I'm doing. So he won a game doing that. So it just shows, it's actually one of the reasons why I personally never ever bought that fucking fake ass Elon Musk's hype that like AI was going to take over the fucking world and rule us. It's like, you wish it would, motherfucker. And you wish you were pressing the button to make it happen. But the reason it never will is because there will always be some way that like, I mean, basically illogic can always be a counter to logic, you know?
CLG.
It can. It really can. People don't get that. Like there was almost a genius in that, in the naming of that team, you know?
Yeah. So basically, I think if coaches like want to really improve their infrastructure, it's not about getting more analysts. You need to do needs analysis. You need to figure out why a meta is a certain way, why a champion is a certain way. You need to explore things more. And like, if you want to self-improve as a coach, you need to go look up the, like, you know, learn about some great coaches in history. Yes. And understand, like, what's his name? His name was just on the tip of my tongue. Phil Jackson.
There you go.
Mario Zagallo from football, like soccer. He was a really good Brazilian coach. Like, who's Pep Guardiola? I think.
There you go.
Yeah. So like these people, like look at traditional sports. They've been doing it for hundreds of years, and they've learned some things along the way. If you just, instead of playing League of Legends for hundreds of years and coming to those conclusions, just, you know, expedite the process for yourself. Look at people that have already done it.
Do you want to know a little tidbit? Because one of the things I like to do with these Patreon discussions is, because everyone sees it's just a discussion, they think, what the fuck, I wouldn't want to listen to a bunch of fucking losers, nerds talking about the game. They don't listen, right? So they don't watch these things. They don't know when I just sometimes tell you guys like straight fire, behind the scenes shit. Sometimes I've even said stuff that I wouldn't say on other broadcasts because I just know it will go hidden. Like, and luckily CSGO Reddit is so ignorant, they upvote memes. They'll never upvote a timestamp to one of these things. So I can tell you a little secret right now. One of the things people don't understand about me in the scene is where my persona ends and my real personality begins is obviously off camera. And so when I'm off camera, there are players that I'm a fan of, but on camera, I just talk about like the angle that I like about them and I give their criticism, but it's very, very harsh. A whole bunch of these players, I essentially fulfill a mentor role with them behind the scenes. And that's why some of my favourite players, I'm almost cheating when I say some of them are going to be the best player ever, because I'm fucking helping them behind the scenes to become it and get to the next level. Like, not literally, because I don't believe you can actually teach a person anything. I think you can only point the way and hopefully give them a tip, you know, so like, maybe look at it this way, and then they do, and then they get it, you know, but it's them who gets it. So I'll give you a couple of examples now. 3 players that I've helped out with like documentaries to watch, like books to read about interesting characters, even fiction books. And the key thing is, at first, I just tell them, I think you'd really enjoy this actually, like this particular angle. And I just draw them in, I get them curious, but then I let them enjoy it initially as though it was just entertainment. They're just enjoying it. Now, anyone who doesn't know anything about social engineering, every movie you ever watch in your life, every documentary has either an implicit or explicit bias and agenda built into it of what the person, because think about it, it's what the person showing you wants you to see and wants you to take away from it. You won't always. You might be blind to the subtext in a French fucking film noir, whatever, you know, like a neo-wave movie, a film noir movie from the 40s or something. But the funny thing is, I understand that because one of the things I had to learn as an autistic person is I could only read the surface level of what people said. So I had to learn, I learned it through things like people who do hypnosis and pickup artists and poker players. No, there is a whole world below that of subtext. It's what you're trying to communicate through what you are saying, but you aren't saying it. It's being communicated through what you say. So what I basically did was I was just fucking their minds in the best possible way with shit that when they experienced it, it would be like Inception when the idea got in their brain. So I'll give you an example. When Doublelift was a terrible teammate, it's not because he joined TSM and TSM's brilliant and he became a great shotgun. I literally was showing this guy stuff. I'll give you a great example of one right now. The classic basketball documentary, Kobe Bryant's Muse. Because one of the things Kobe Bryant explains in this documentary, a guy who was considered a terrible teammate, too harsh, he explains that the way he overcame being too harsh is because when he was being too harsh, he expected everyone to play as good as him, but none of them could. So what he had to learn instead was, that's not even how you win a championship. You win a championship when, assuming you've got good enough players to start with, each player plays at his best level relative to who he is and his skill set. And then secondly, if Kobe Bryant really had the best competitive mindset and the best drive, right, they're not going to think the same way as me because they're not me. But can I give them like a seed of my mindset? Can I like cultivate in a guy who's very like quiet, for example, a way that he can be cocky that he did something, or he can be confident that he did a very, very basic task that I could do something 10 times better? And what I was trying to communicate to Doublelift with this was, think about it, mate. You have to learn how to use your teammates. You think he's a shit teammate, therefore, fuck, he's only going to betray me and let me down. He can't do what I want to do. No, what you have to do is find something he can do and empower him to do it and make him think that when he does it, he's done as much of a job as you, even though in the objective sense, you're obviously carrying the team. When you do that, you will win championships. And all I'll say is, I think the record speaks for itself on that one. Then there's another one. You want to know another person I showed this documentary to? Oh, about last year at a certain time. Just a player called Elige. Don't know if you've been following Counter-Strike at all. His team sort of won almost everything this year except the majors. Like, again, what do you think happened there? He was already a genius player. He was already a very clever player. But his problem was he was selfish with it. Like, he just locked that genius into his game and it didn't impact on the others. So what he probably had to learn, I think this is why he started last year, given all that room to Naf, and those, he had to learn how to use these guys, make those guys shine. And then once he did, then he took over and did his own game as well, and he kind of controlled the match. So I won't go into some of the others, but there's a reason why it sounds like I'm just like, wow, he's charting the career of Device and some of these players. Well, yeah, I am. I'm also like low-key trying to fucking nudge them in the right direction and away from other shit, you know.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's like being a villain. I'm like the Bond villain behind it all, but no one ever exposes me because I never do that shit move at the end, you know, where they're in the chair like, well, Mr. Bond, here's all my secrets, now kill me. Like, I just skip that. I'm like Watchmen. I'm like, I did it 5-10 minutes ago. What are you talking about? Like,
I mean, what you've highlighted there is another important thing for coaches to learn is how to circumvent their player's ego. You know, it's sort of like a Socrates method, you know, like you either like you question them in a way just to elicit to understand what their biases is that drive their opinion,
sure,
or you ask them questions to lead them in a certain direction. And it's sort of like when you tell a player, you know, you're a shit teammate, what he's going to respond is like sort of like the wife beater mentality, like I only beat her, or you know, I only did this because they pissed me off.
Yes,
it's the same thing with the player.
Yes,
like,
it is.
You're a shit teammate, you know. No, I'm only like they made me angry because they play like shit. They like, you know, they choked and I couldn't carry, like they're so heavy I couldn't carry them. You need to learn to how to avoid a player denying something like, oh, you know, you played badly. No, I was playing just fine. It was whatever, like, oh, I was just fucking around in practice or whatever it is. It's like mental gymnastics to avoid their ego being hurt. So as a coach, you really need to learn how to circumvent that and work around it and try to get the player to learn implicitly. Like you're doing something explicit, but you're trying to plant the seed there to get them to come to the conclusions themselves. Because when they do that, A, they're no longer in this issue of explicit processing, like thinking about it while they're doing it. And B, if they think they've come up with it, you know, it just makes them feel like a genius and it's something that they'd adhere to because it's their own genius.
Right, here's the thing. We'll end this in a minute. So do you other two want to jump in on that in any way?
I mean, just if you accept that, okay, coaches now aren't very good. If you were now an org, like you could choose between, let's say, Prolly, who has, you know, a lot of experience but wasn't very successful lately. Mithi, who was a, you know, a genius guy, sure, now transferring to head coach. I know some Korean guy like Koma or whatever, or a guy from the outside, from a sports or coaching degree or whatever. If you were an org right now, how would you like rank these, or what would be your top choice?
Well, here's the other thing, mate. Like this is if you've ever seen my video on in-game leaders, you might know where I'm going with this. The most bullshit thing about the concept of an in-game leader is it's a minimum of 4 I identified. There's probably more subgroups. It's like 4 totally different skill sets that one man has to do while also playing Counter-Strike. That is a fucking ludicrous premise. And even the best of all time typically never maxed out all 4 qualities. Now, what's funny is I identified, you might be interested in this, because one of the players that helped me identify this was Zonic. Because in Zonic's teams, he wasn't the in-game leader, but he was essentially the core leader. Ave was his in-game leader, and Ave was basically like Glaive, which is why it's amazing that they work together now. And what happens is, Ave was the guy like Glaive who studies the demo and comes up with a strat book and calls the right strat, and then he does the right thing. But you know what? He might not actually sometimes in a game be able to notice when a pattern's being broken and one small thing's going off. So what Zonic would do, he also had a good tactical understanding, but he wouldn't be the guy suited to call every round. He would just give Ave an extra set of eyes. He would say, like I like the B hits we're doing on Inferno here up Banana, but like if you notice, like they pull back a little bit faster than our flashes. So like we should probably like hold 5 seconds or like fake the other side first. And what would happen is that would just course correct Glaive as he went through the game. And so it was classic. Another example from 1.6, Khan and DSN. Khan would call the basic strats and was the leader, but DSN would also contribute a strat, do that. Now, here's what's funny. Sometimes those other guys, Aluinense is doing this right now, tried to be the IGL. And you know what? Fell apart completely. They didn't know the strength of the other guy. So I would say that's, to me, a false choice. Here's what I would do. First of all, I might consider taking the guy outside of the game. But even then, I don't want to break your heart, guys, here, or fucking blow your minds, but if you ever knew about football, loads of the football coaches don't know these concepts. Some of them do. Pep Guardiola is probably a good example. He's used many different systems in different teams. I think some coaches, like I think personally, like Alex Ferguson, for example, probably just fit players to his system. Like he just kept doing his approach over and over again, cookie cutter, and then he won a lot of championships. So I don't think all the top people are doing this because, again, it requires, like, they haven't interacted with someone who knows linguistics or philosophy or any state of mind aspect. So what I would say is this. The real hack right now, give me infinite money in the world, and this is what I would do tomorrow. I would start with Youngbok from Fnatic because he's conquered a lot of the big, more advanced. In fact, he's done it specifically because he isn't an X's and O coach. This is his way of countering the other coaches. He's the best at managing personalities and calming people down and motivating people and building simple systems. But then what I would do is I would say to Prolly or to Mithy, you don't even want to be a head coach, mate. You're not suited for this job. That's not for you. Be the assistant coach. They call them analyst, which is one of the problems. Call him the assistant coach. Call him the fucking strategic coach. He would be the coach there, and he would do all the stuff in the game, and he would coach all the minor details. And the idea is he wouldn't fuck up the head coach's approach because the head coach is the director. He's the guy deciding all the big decisions. And this guy, in this scenario, I guess I'd make the analogy here, like Mithy would be the cinematographer. He's deciding the exact feel and the lighting and exactly the thing. But you know what? Without both of them, you won't get shit. And so I'll give you here's a little gem for you on the way out the door, right? If you want to watch some of the best movies you will ever see, almost no movies will ever top these for how good they look and how incredibly sumptuous the atmosphere is and how subtle the plots are. They're the movies of the director Wong Kar-wai from, I think, Hong Kong. So the famous example is one called In the Mood for Love. Now, don't worry about what the plot's about. Yeah, the plot's not going to hook you. It's not the fucking Matrix. But just watch these movies because the cinematography, the key thing is his biggest movies, the best ones, he did with this guy, this cinematographer who's a genius. And the key thing is causing their own different ways. Like Wong Kar-wai is very good at setting up very subtle plots that unravel in a special way and mix with the music and the atmosphere. And then his cinematographer was basically someone who like invented a whole bunch of techniques and had different ideas for how you shoot light and stuff. So when the two came together, like the Venn diagram overlap, which is the movie, it's unbelievable because normally a great movie is one genius. But what's funny is what we never realized was, yeah, but that's one genius who's a director. So what if his cinematographer's shit? What if the cameraman's just okay? Well, that will that'll bottleneck the production. If you took these two geniuses in different fields that didn't have to clash, I'm telling you, like, they're so underrated movies because you have to sort of understand some of these concepts, but they're unbelievable. They're like moving art. It's like watching a fucking painting that's just going in frames past you. It's unbelievable. There's a little gem for you on the way out. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Dane Cuskley, Dean Tanglis, Chi Mao, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Peter the Feeder, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion and Mohammed Alabdul Razzaq. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to ask me a question in my monthly Patreon AMA. Would you like teasers on upcoming content that I'm doing? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion directly with me? Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description below.